안녕하십니까. HMM R&D 팀에서 근무하는 김영선입니다. 먼저 오늘 이렇게 훌륭한 컨퍼런스에서 발표할 수 있도록 기회를 주신 데 감사드리고요. 오늘 사실 제가 발표할 내용은 보시는
Presentation is, as you see on the slide, digitalization and decarbonization strategies of shipping companies and how they're responding to this trend. I am given a short time for presentation. So as for digitalization, I would like to ask you to refer to my presentation. During my presentation, I'd like to focus on decarbonization case examples of our company. I would like to briefly explain about regulations. You may know very well about the GHG regulations. IMO requires us to achieve this GHG reduction targets. As for technical measures, you have to prepare EEDI and EEXI. For operational measures, as explained by the previous speaker, you have to be prepared in terms of CEEMP and CII. After these regulations and strategies were announced, the item that is surrounded with controversy would be market-based measures. It will be a milestone regulation in this industry, and EU has its own regulations. I don't think I need to explain about EEDI and EEXI. I'll briefly touch on this. For EEXI, when a ship is built, in the past there was no separate operational regulation. But even if you comply with EEDI, or even if a ship has nothing to do with EEDI, if you don't comply with EEXI, then that ship would not be able to do the operation. EPL, engine power limitation, is one of the most effective ways to respond to this regulation. In our case, most of the vessels are container vessels, as you see in the graph. Even if we lower the speed through EPL, container vessels will not be under significant influence, because container vessels are slow steaming. And in the past, the speed of vessels was much faster than the current container vessels, but tank carriers may be significantly affected by this regulation. We are more concerned about CII. Efficiency of the vessels are classified into the grades A, B, C, D, E. By 27, IMO actually announced the carbon reduction plan, and we expect that the regulation on CII will change in accordance with the IMO's regulation direction. And ships that were rated D or E would find it difficult to continue operating their vessels. There are HFO vessels and LNG vessels. So the first one starts with grade B, and by 2030 the grade will become E in the case of HFO vessels. Recently built vessels and new vessels will find it difficult to satisfy the CII regulation. If vessels are built based on LNG, then they will be able to maintain grade A or B until 2030. Then, how could those vessels maintain their grade stably? The easiest way is to lower the speed. As you see in the graph, vessels with HFO can maintain the maximum speed of 22 knots, but in order to maintain the grade at C or D level, then as you see in the orange line, they have to lower the speed. And if container vessels operate at lower speed, then they will have lower commercial value. But in the case of LNG carriers, that's the green colors one. For quite a long time, LNG carriers will be able to maintain relatively higher speed. In order to maintain grade C or higher level, biofuel would be useful. In order to maintain grade C, a certain amount of biofuel could be mixed with the existing fuel of the vessels. Then you will be able to maintain grade C in a stable manner. Let's have a look at the recently announced measure, which was announced in July, Fit for 55. We are quite concerned about this regulation. Fit for 55 was announced as part of the Green Deal of the EU. It has about 14 guidelines. Among them, there are about 4 guidelines that are directly related to shipping industry. The first one is related to establishing infrastructure of alternative fuel in the EU. By 2025, LNG bunkering infrastructure will be established in the EU according to this regulation. Second one is related to energy tax. So they're going to taxate the use of energy, especially they will impose higher tax on traditional coal energy, and for decarbonization fuel, they will impose lower tax. This is their plan. And we are also concerned about Europe's EUTS system. And we are quite concerned about the emissions allocation structure. And within Europe, 100% will be applied. For non-Europe regions, 50% will be applied. Let's take an example of our vessels. If EU's this regulation is implemented, then the emission purchase cost will be from 7 million euros to up to 40 million euros. We expect this amount of cost will occur. Another regulation is FAILURE Maritime. This is a regulation that will put control on the carbon intensity level of vessels. The red color is the carbon intensity reduction target of the EU. The CII regulation by IMO is related to the fuel efficiency of vessels. It is related to the fuel consumption amount, but the regulation announced by EU is more closely related to the source of energy, the proportion of alternative energy source. Another interesting point is that the EU regulation is based on well-to-wake concept. So from production to the very end of all life cycle of fuel will be considered. So if the traditional HFO figure is 100, then LNG figure will be about 82. So LNG gives you higher effective carbon reduction. But as for hydrogen, ammonia, or methanol, as you see in the table, from well-to-wake perspective, ammonia, methanol, and hydrogen could produce much more greenhouse gas emissions under well-to-wake concept, because well-to-wake concept considers all the life cycle from production to emission. You need to consider E-ammonia and E-ethanol. So e-ammonia or e-ethanol may be recognized and accepted. As such, we are worried about these regulations and how HMM is preparing itself for these regulatory trends. Last May, we had P4G summit meeting. HMM said we're going to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. Our short-term goal is to achieve greenhouse gas emission reduction by 2030. We also joined the Getting to Zero coalition. This is a coalition that announced that it will achieve CO2-free vessel by 2030. HMM joined this coalition and we are actively doing our role. In our strategy, before we build a vessel, HMM will meet with class and builders and create a TFT to study the design concept and discuss energy-saving devices before starting to build the ships. And from EEDI perspective, our new vessels will have much higher energy efficiency. And for existing vessels, depending on the vessel type and the vessel age, we are installing proper systems to meet the regulation. Until last year, we enhanced the container vessels' fuel efficiency by 57%. And we have IMO's reduction targets to be met. And in order to achieve carbon neutrality, energy-saving device is not sufficient. We need to change the fuel itself or replace the propulsion system with other system. So there are many alternative fuels being discussed. Depending on the characteristics of each alternative fuel, they have different influence on the environment. And they have various profiles and characteristics. Basically, by 2030, we think that LNG-fueled ships will be the main trend. And in 2040 or 2050, ammonia and methanol may become commercially available. In the case of hydrogen, after 2040, hydrogen may become available as marine fuel. This is our milestone, and we conducted simulation, and we are expected to use LNG by 2030, methanol and ammonia by 2040, and hydrogen after 2040. And in the process of the existing vessels being replaced with the new ones, we will see the effect of reduction in greenhouse gas emission, as you see in the graph. But from 2030 to 2040, during the period when we operate the conventional ships, we will not be able to reduce the GHG. Then what are we going to do during the period when we operate conventional vessels? The solution would be to use biofuel. In order to demonstrate the biofuel, we are cooperating with various institutions in Korea, and we conducted tests together. So far, the test outcome shows that biofuel could be a very promising marine fuel. And not only biofuel, but also ammonia fuel is part of our cooperation activities with other institutions. So we are planning to increase the portion of biofuel. And if we use those fuels as we planned, then our simulation shows this result. We can reduce greenhouse gas emission according to IMO's target. So alternative fuel is a very difficult issue. We need to think about the uncertainty of oil price, bunkering infrastructure, and there is uncertainty in the technology itself. And the biggest uncertainty exists around regulation. In IMO regulation and Fit for 2055, they apply the concept of well to wake. So hydrogen and ammonia could produce much more greenhouse gas emissions under the well to wake concept. So the international regulation should be clearly defined depending on whether it takes tank to wake or whether it takes well to wake concept. The result will become different. So what is the direction of IMO's regulation? We wonder whether it's going to continue with tank to wake concept or well to wake concept. And what will happen in the LNG tanker related issues? So many ship owners are saying that they are not going to place any order until the regulation become clear. And we can understand the situation. So I hope that the regulatory uncertainties will be addressed. And summary. My presentation was supposed to touch on digitalization and decarbonization, but I only talked about decarbonization. Digitalization and decarbonization are called the 2D. For a shipping company, these are risks and at the same time opportunities. They have differences. In the case of digitalization, as technology develops and vessels' safety and efficiency are being improved, digitalization is a kind of action voluntarily taken by shipping companies. And decarbonization is something that is done due to the pressure from the international society. So it seems that the shipping companies are taking defensive posture for decarbonization efforts. So from the shipping company perspective, we have a bit different stance towards digitalization and decarbonization. But the two Ds have similar characteristics as well. Digitalization and decarbonization are very important issues. If we don't properly respond to these issues, we will not be able to survive the market. Another common characteristics between the two is that both digitalization and decarbonization should be based on innovative technology solution. Korea is a country with well-developed shipbuilding equipment and structure. So Korea is in a favorable position with good quality infrastructure to respond to these two Ds. Thank you for your attention. I will take questions during panel discussion.